On the test, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Okay, Chris, are we ready to go? I'll wait for yours. Can I move this audience mic into the middle, or is it here on purpose? Got it. Okay, great. All right, good evening. Thank you all for coming. I know we're a small group tonight, so we can be pretty informal, I would say. I'm Cheryl Champ, I'm the superintendent. If we haven't met, I welcome you and thank you for coming tonight. Before we get started, I do want to, it's very loud, just ask, because I want to be able to tailor the presentation to what your needs are tonight. I know we've got two members of the Board of Education with us tonight, Anne-Marie Garcia and Catherine Cohen. We've also got our high school principal, Mr. Sean Llewellyn, and they've heard this many, many times. Okay, that's a good point. But I know many of you, this is your first time coming or maybe second time coming, so I want to be sure that you get your questions answered. So before we start, maybe I'll do a quick pulse check-in on what are the burning questions or things you most want to hear about. Jill, maybe I'll start with you. Just open the...
I'm here to be a proponent of the bond vote and to support it. I think it's really important. I think the board has done a lot of work on it. And I think it's really important. You know, some people are concerned about the specifics of the design, and I think it's really important for everybody to understand that you're going to run focus groups and enhance those details once you have a yes vote to spend the money. So.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you. Anyone, is there anything specific that you'd like to hear tonight about?
Why the timing? Why would we put 5 competitions along with the budget vote on the same day?
Okay.
It seems very rushed. And secondly, confusion about where the central administration is currently housed.
Okay.
Where would they be housed under this proposal?
Okay.
Given that we're purchasing a house that wouldn't even accommodate a third of them. So
Okay.
it just seems to be,
Okay. I can spend some time on that.
yeah.
Okay, for sure. Anything specific for?
I feel like you did a very good job covering it during the tour, but I was really here just to see what was the work that was going to be done in the high school and how it would affect the current students as they were going to school here. But I think it all really needs to be done.
Okay, great. And ladies, anything that you specifically would like me to address tonight? Any questions you want to?
I can't hear you.
Oh, sorry. Any questions that you specifically want me to answer tonight? I want to be sure that I give you whatever information you need tonight.
I have a few questions.
Okay.
I don't know if you can answer me, but give it a try.
Okay. All right. Any topics?
Do it now?
Well, if you tell me what they are now, then I can be sure to answer them as I go through.
I'm very interested in the history of our bond issues.
Okay.
And especially, since we built that new elementary school and middle school.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I couldn't catch my breath.
Oh, that's okay. Take your time.
It's very interesting how much on the bond issues, when they're floated, and for how much interest, and if they have been used up, or what the length of the bond issue is, and if they were used for what they were intended to.
Okay.
I would like to get that. I couldn't get any information on the computer whatsoever.
Okay.
On that issue, they always said I have to tap into a special database. Is that true?
No, I can answer a lot of those questions for you. I can't give you the documents right now. I don't have those, but we can answer many of those questions.
If I have to go under the Freedom of Information Act, I will file that.
Great.
I would like to know from 1990 to 2025, what bond issues and for what lengths and what interest they were floated and what was the use of it.
Okay.
Okay, now, but you will know what the bond issue was for the elementary school and for the middle school. What bond issues were floated for that? You have an idea what the amount was?
I don't have that with me tonight, and I don't want to misspeak. I do. I just don't. I don't want to misspeak without having the specifics here. But what I'm going to do,
There was a bond issue for 96 million. What was that for?
I don't know of a bond issuance for 96 million.
And 54 million in 2020. No explanation, nothing. It was very strange that you can't get any information on that, because it is very important. I lived here for 55 years, and I have watched Pelham Manor all these years, up and downs, you know.
Yeah.
So, but lately I haven't really bothered with the Board of Education, because it was always the same old issue. If you don't get it the first time, you float it the next time till you have it. Is that the same issue this year?
I think it's going to depend on how the vote comes out, for sure.
So what the sense of voting? Explain that to me.
So I guess I would put it as simply as if the district identifies that there are needs that they really feel need to be addressed in the building. So I'll use our infrastructure, for example. We just did the building tour. Our boilers, they're at the end of their lives. They're 30 years old. They need to be replaced. If we go out to the voters and they say no, that's a democratic process. We've got to figure out why they said no and adjust our plan. But the reality is they still need boilers.
And it makes no sense,
Yeah.
because it's just outrageous.
Testing,
to
testing,
ask
testing.
The taxpayer here to come and vote, and if it doesn't go through, you float it again till you have your way. So
Check, 1, 2,
it's
2,
really,
2, 2.
You know,
To me, I mean, insulting to do that.
Yeah.
Now, I have another question.
Testing, 1, 2.
Issue of 145 million goes through. We will be in Pelham here, the biggest indebted district, school district. How can you ask the taxpayer of Pelham, where we went through
Check.
COVID, and then these miserable years, the 4 years of Biden, everything is bankrupt. And if you float that bond issue of that amount, you're going to get us in financial problem. It's written on the wall, because we had the high school, we had the elementary school, we had so many bond issues in a very short time. And
So-
how much can you absorb?
and I can't,
Before I forget,
Okay.
because I'm old, so I easily forget. But you know,
yeah.
it is absolutely insane. Like in these buildings, for all these years, since 1800 and something, there were no air conditioning. Our children were better educated than they're getting now. In 20 and 30 years ago, much better. I know.
I'll disagree, but that's okay.
People, in Pelham. And why all of a sudden is the urgency to get air conditioning for our little kids that they go out of school in June? The buildings are all stone and
So that's the easiest question you've asked me tonight. The governor passed a new law requiring that we can't put classrooms and have instruction in any classroom that's 88 degrees or hotter. And all the top floors of our old schools without air conditioning do get at least to 88 degrees on those hot days.
they're hot.
They are. So we have to do it.
They were hot 50 years ago.
Well, I
And
know.
nobody complained, and they were happy with the education. And all of us, I wouldn't say anything
Yeah.
if we wouldn't have already bond issues in such a magnitude. I
Yeah.
mean, unbelievable amounts
Yeah.
for a small community.
So-
And have you figured out, or the board or whatever, how much it will be per thousand assessed valuation come to
Yes.
as an increase? That particular
Yes.
bond issue.
Yeah.
Is that figured out?
Yes, and that information
How
is
much
in,
it on 1,000?
it is
Because,
in the
1,000 is,
handouts.
because all our homes are so much more money, because all the young people and the ones which were afraid of
Yep.
the crime came over here
Yeah.
and bought all these homes for
Yeah.
number more money,
So, yeah, no, so I would say,
And the people which lived here for a long time are really,
yeah, no, I know it's hard. And I would say a couple of things. I can't verify this,
Yeah,
the
but
data that was,
approximately,
well, Well, no, I can't verify the data that was put out in a letter saying that we were the highest borrowed, but I cannot verify that data. I'm not going to speak to that data. We do have within the focus, there's information. This should have come to all mailboxes, and if it didn't, you can pick some up tonight. On the back, it shows the tax impact of the borrowing for the $140 million projects. And we're going to be adding a tax calculator onto the website before the end of this week, where you can actually put in your home's assessed value. It'll tell you exactly what your taxes would be depending on which of the propositions passed. So part of the reason the board put 4 separate propositions up is because they recognized how big that $140 million number was. They were very aware of that and very cognizant of that and knew that not everyone was going to be able to support it. And they wanted to give the community as much say as possible for exactly the reasons that you're saying, because not everyone can bear that cost. And they recognized and respected that.
You know, I must say, with all due respect, the Board of Education went out of its way to spend a lot of money on those flyers. Now, it would have been really fair and proper of the Board of Education to enlighten the people how much money we're still paying on the previous bonds, which are not expired.
So I can give you, and the gentleman brings up a good point. I'd like to go into the presentation.
I
Before you leave, I can give you the names of the people to email to get the information that you're looking for.
And I like to get a list of all the bonds,
Yep.
like I said.
Yep, I will give you the names of who to
what they
email.
Were issued for, and what actually was done during
Yep.
that time. If you can provide that
Yes.
to me, I would really be thankful.
Absolutely. I'll give you the names of the people to send that to, and we'll take care of that for you for sure. Okay. So, presentation was frozen. Hopefully we're good to go here. Here we go. Okay, so I'm going to try to move quickly and hit the points that were raised. On May 20th, there are going to be 7 different items on the ballot. We do the voting now in the middle school gym, right over on that side of the building. So the first proposition will be the school budget. Second will be the house at Franklin Place. Third will be the 4 bond propositions split up, so folks have a lot of say there. And then last will be the school board election. We have 3 members of the board that are up for election again. They are running uncontested for those 3 open seats and for another 3-year term. The budget itself, the main budget is always, the biggest driver in our budgets are always personnel, because we're a people business. Teachers, staff, our salaries and benefits is usually 75 to 80% of our budget. This year it's 76%, and that's based on settled contracts, and we are currently in one contract negotiation with our clerical unit that will be anticipating being settled by the end of the year. So we budgeted for that. We're, like many people, seeing increases in health insurance costs, liability costs, utilities, transportation, et cetera. So that's a lot of what's driving the change in the budget. We continue to maintain a 2% contingency so that we can allow for any unforeseen costs. And part of the budget that we are seeing here that does relate to our conversation tonight about projects, as part of this budget, we are seeing an expected drop-off in building state aid. The building gives us state aid amortized over several years, depending on the project. And when that comes to an end, that's when we see a drop in the building aid. So we are seeing that in the coming year's budget. Additionally, this year we had 13 teachers retire, so the board directed us to be really thoughtful and strategic about replacement of staff, recognizing the financial burden on the community and wanting to be sustainable long term. So through that, we found which areas we could reduce some costs by not replacing teachers that were retiring, but also still offering the same rich curricular program within current board guidelines. Overall, we were able to reduce just a little bit over 4.6 staff positions. That's some ups and downs. So we had increases in special education. We had some cuts in other areas, but overall decrease of 4.61%. So the overall budget at a glance, the total appropriations is $96,290,000. That's a $2.7 million budget to budget increase, which is 2.9%. The allowable tax levy increase is 3.48%, and that is what is being proposed to the community. That is tax cap compliant, and you can see from this that's made up of 2 different factors. The operating budget, which is the part that's subject to the cap, that's at 2.4 percent increase. And then the capital budget, the capital expenses that we have, again, that's mostly caused by that drop in building aid that's outside of the tax cap. Additionally, the board uses its debt service reserve to help keep that number down so the taxes are not higher for the community. Within this, we are preserving the programs that we are known for across all boards, staying within class guidelines, supporting special education, and working to accelerate our conversion to electronic registration, which is going to make things more efficient, easier for us to cross-check, and make sure the information is updated. Second on the ballot will be the house purchase. So there has been a lot of questions about this. The owner of this house approached us because of its strategic location to the campus. It's right on the corner of Nyack and Franklin, so right across from our old district offices. As we went on the tour, I shared with folks, the district offices used to be on this ground floor in this building. The business office was right down that hall. My office, personnel, curriculum, and special education were over on the Franklin and Corley's side of the building on the ground floor. In the 2018 bond, we renovated what used to be our office spaces into classrooms, so we all had to move out of the building. In 2019, before those projects happened, we had the opportunity to buy the house adjacent to Colonial School. It was 314 Pelham. That house we purchased and did the renovations necessary to outfit it to state education department standards to get a certificate of occupancy for offices. That's a 3-story house. We were not able to use the 3rd floor because of the requirements. We'd have had to add either sprinklers or fire escapes, and we're being cognizant of how much money we were putting into that house, knowing that long term, the purpose of that property was buying it so that we could someday expand Colonial. In the short term, we needed space for offices, so the business office wound up moving in there. So we've got room for 8 to 9 staff members in that house. The rest of the district offices wound up in rental space at Sanborn Map, which is where we currently are, so on the far end of town. So with the opportunity now to purchase the house at 29 Franklin, we entered into a negotiated contract. It's based on fair market value. That's all we're allowed to pay. So we use things like the appraised value, the assessed value, and the current market to set what is a defendable fair market value for the house. And so that's what's being put before voters is the $1.45 million purchase price plus up to $400,000 for renovations to get that certificate of occupancy for state education department. And that was based on that's a little bit more than what we had to spend at the Colonial House, but given cost escalations, we thought that was a reasonable budget. That would house approximately 9 staff members in that house, which would leave about 6 people left that we would have to then relocate from the current Sanborn Map building. So the hope would be if the high school project passes, there's a classroom that we've identified that's behind the middle school main office that we would convert to the remaining offices because we'd be moving that classroom up into some of the newly renovated offices. Yes.
That makes sense.
Is it ideal? No. Is it workable? Yes. I think what we learned a lot through the pandemic about working remotely and being able to use more efficient methods of connecting for collaboration and for meetings. One thing I would say, it puts us physically all within walkable distance. And when we were in this building, we still had some offices on one side, some offices on the other side. In this case, we'll have offices on this side, office literally across the hall or across the street from what used to be our old offices. So distance-wise, those are very comparable to what we used to have. And then, yes, it's a 2-block walk over to Colonial. It's not ideal, but I think the benefit we're seeing right now is getting out of rental space because we spend about $175,000 annually on rent, plus utilities. So this gets us back into district-owned property. That rental would pay off the house, in not too distant future. It gets us all back on the campus, gets us near the kids, and we believe it can be a workable situation.
$75,000 over 10 years is less than the purchase price just of the house.
Yeah.
Without the renovation.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So
You still don't know what you're going to do with Colonial long term.
long term, I'm sure at some point we're going to be expanding that building.
People are at the Sanborn Map building now.
We've got 15 up there now.
So why, from an economic and management point of view, this makes no sense.
And I think to us it does, because we see the long-term potential of the property, because it could also give us an opportunities to expand if needed down the road for this campus. It gives us another property right adjacent to this property. There could be eventually other properties. These are probably long beyond my time in the district, but the board saw very strategic value in acquiring the property, given that it's contiguous to the high school property. And I guess we just view it differently. We think it does, and we're committed to making it work as far as the management of the offices. The other piece I would add, we're not borrowing for that. We're using undesignated fund balance for that purchase. So it's no new taxes. It's not going to be mortgaged. It's just a straight cash purchase. Yeah. No, I don't believe so. We're only allowed to spend what is authorized. No, we're only allowed to spend what's authorized by the voters. So we would only be able to spend up to $1.85 million.
And then the renovation,
No, that was including the renovation.
the 1.8 is including?
Yes. Yeah, 1.45 is the actual sale value. The additional 400 is the up to for a renovation, but we're not allowed to spend more than that. Yeah. Okay. So that's the house purchase. Okay. Third on the ballot then, or third, fourth, fifth, and sixth will be our 4 bond propositions. And as I said, the board did split these into 4 because they recognized how big of an ask this was and wanted people to have a lot of say. One thing that's important to note is Proposition 1, which is our core infrastructure proposition, has to pass in order for any of the other ones to pass. We didn't want to be in a position where we're, say, doing an expansion at the high school and we have boilers that we're not able to replace, 30-year-old boilers. As the folks on the tour saw, we've got a lot of water intrusion coming from masonry issues. We've got some leaking roofs. We've got 30-year-old boilers throughout the district, and things that are really critical infrastructure that we cannot afford to have go into failure. You may have heard back in December, we wound up having to shut the middle school down for a day because we had our HVAC units. We wound up with a leak on the roof that flooded the middle school. And that's a unit that was already approved to be replaced. It was funded. We just got our state ed approval to do the work this past fall, but we can't do it when the students are in session, so it's scheduled to be replaced this summer. But 2 years after the vote, we wound up with that unit in failure. So that's why we're going out. Part of why we're doing this now before anything is in failure. The buildings were all identified to be in satisfactory condition, but it takes us at least 2 years lead time to do any kind of major work. So I know that's another big question that's out there now. So let's talk a bit about the financing. You asked the question about why are we doing this now. There's so much uncertainty. There's a very big ask. Part of the reasons have to do with a couple different things. The board's been looking into our facilities and finance for the last 2 years. Last school year, it was a big focus, and this year it's continued to be a large focus. It's part of our strategic plan. In doing that, they had an updated building condition survey that identified top to bottom all the issues that our buildings have. They're in good condition, but they're 100-year-old buildings suffering from what 100-year-old buildings suffer from, which is a lot of infrastructure. The other things that were identified had to do with program, because they weren't designed to support our current 2025 modern instructional program, and space. Those were the biggest issues. When they looked at the financial short and long-term forecast, we met with our financial advisors, and they showed us that there's 2 opportunities coming up in the near future. This goes to your bonding question, where the last Colonial bond is going to be paid off pretty soon, in about 2026, 27. And then a few years later, the middle school will be paid off in 31. And what that does, and this is what a lot of districts, most districts are doing under the tax cap environment, is when debt drops off, knowing that you have large capital projects that need to be addressed, they then repurpose that debt service to go and borrow again without having to add to the taxes. So with the Colonial drop-off, we have the ability to borrow up to $10 million for renovations without adding to the tax burden. And a few years later, we can borrow up to $55 million without adding to the tax burden. So we can do $65 million worth of work without adding to the taxes. So that's part of why we feel now is an important time and a good time to consider this work. Also, our current our state aid, building aid ratio is 49% of the eligible projects. So that's been steadily increasing a little bit. When we were doing the 2018 bond, when we did the Hutchinson School, Our aid ratio was at 43%. It's crept up a little bit every year now to 49. All those factors together, plus there are some incentives for the Proposition 4 work. There's tax incentives that could be available as rebates after the project. And we continue to maintain our AAA credit rating, which gives us good borrowing rates. Those are the reasons that the board felt like, even though there's a lot of uncertainty financially, that now was a good time. And again, knowing that it's going to be a couple years of lead time before we can actually do the work that needs to be done on the buildings, that's why we went forward now. So any questions around that before we move on to, and I will add, on the back of this focus is it gives you a little bit of a spread of what the tax impacts would be. Scenario one is if only the Proposition 1 passed, so there'd be no new taxes. That's $56 million of work. That would all be within that $65 million of tax neutral borrowing, so there would not need to be any additional taxes for that. Scenario 2 is if the infrastructure plus the Siwanoy projects passed. That would be more like, that would total up to about $481 annually for the average assessed home value. And that is about $96 million worth of work for $481 a year. The taxes would not start right away. They would likely start in about 2029. It would be that budget year that the tax onset would be felt. The work itself probably would not begin until summer of 2027. So we'd pass it now, about 2 years down the road, the work would begin, and about 2 years after that was when the taxes would start to be felt. Scenario 3 is if the infrastructure in the high school project passed, so again, just over $450 a year. Scenario 4 would be if infrastructure, Siwanoy projects, and high school projects passed. That's the $1,233, so a little over $100 a month. And then scenario 5 is if everything passed. That's another about $64 on top of that, so almost $1,300 a month for the average home value. So within that is the calculations. And again, we're finalizing the tax calculator that'll be on our website very shortly. So you can look up to get your tax bill, put your exact amount in, and it'll tell you exactly what that would look like for you. This is the same chart, so I'm going to go past that. So very quickly, just want to give you a little bit more detail on each of the propositions. As I said, Proposition 1 is the core infrastructure. This one has to pass in order for anything else to pass. So it is roofs, windows, masonry, waterproofing on the older buildings, anything that's been identified as in need of that. And we saw a lot of that on our tour tonight. It also would be replacement and upgrades of our boilers. They're about 30 years old, end of life. And those would all be replaced. Their current steam systems, they would be upgraded to hydronic systems, and all the piping connected to them would also need to be replaced because you can't run hydronic on the same pipes as the steam system. So that would involve, that's a lot of extensive work that mostly would be done during the summers when school is not in session. Additionally, this would propose air conditioning at Prospect Hill and Colonial elementary schools. And again, part of that is the governor's new law. And part of it is because of being with hydronic systems, it gives us the ability to pair that with air conditioning pretty seamlessly. We haven't, once we know what passes, we'll figure out the exact timeline. Same kind of thing. I would love to say we could start some of that sooner, but that work is predominantly going to happen over summers. So it's going to take us a year to design and get state ed approvals. So definitely by 2027, potentially something the year before that. Because again, we don't want to be in a system failure position. Yeah. Just some pictures. We saw these on the walk on our little building tour. This is the high school boilers. Prospect Hill also is within this package of replacing the slate roof at Prospect Hill. It lasted 100 years. The thought was budget to do that once for the next 100 years. And we've got windows throughout the district. So Proposition 2 is all Siwanoy. So it's all that same infrastructure work at Siwanoy and air conditioning at Siwanoy, plus upgrading it for ADA and dealing with some of the space and program issues. This whole package for Siwanoy totals $42.6 million. So it includes all that infrastructure, air conditioning, and then finally upgrading it to ADA compliance. It's the last of the schools that's not ADA accessible. So it's got 28 stairs up to the front door, 7 levels of stairs within it. So you can't get in there if you have any kind of mobility issues. You can't get to all parts of the building. So what this would do is, because of the split level design, you have to put 2 different elevators in it to get to all parts of the building. And that would wind up taking space out of 4 full-size classrooms. We are maxed to capacity now. We're actually a little over capacity, so we can't afford to lose classroom space without replacing it. So that's what's leading us to propose an expansion. Additionally, there's no cafeteria in the building. It's just the gym. And if you see some pictures in the handouts, you'll see they put 2 grade levels of students in there to do lunch, and then on 1/3 of the gym, and on the other side, they run intramurals every day. So it's very loud, very crowded, and lunch actually runs the entire schedule for the whole building. So everything, even our enrichment programs, arts and education, assemblies, all that has to schedule itself around lunch. So what we're doing is proposing a cafeteria be built underneath the existing gym. So we're keeping the footprint of that building just the way it is, putting the cafeteria under the gym, which then means we have to replace the art room, which is currently under the gym. So the proposal is to add a 8 classroom expansion. We tried to keep it as small as possible, but make it big enough to recoup now the 5 classrooms that we're losing to do the ADA work in the cafeteria, and then give us 3 extra classes for flexibility. If your children went here, you know sometimes there's 2 sections at a grade level, sometimes there's 3. Our numbers fluctuate from year to year, so it gives us the flexibility to deal with that fluctuation, and also a little bit of extra space in case there's growth down the road. We did work really hard with the neighbors to try to minimize the size of the footprint of that, because the outside area is very small, and we're very sensitive to how important that is to the community. In order for Proposition 2 to pass, if it passes, 1 has to also pass. So these 2 are really hand in hand and would take care of all the infrastructure needs that were identified in the district, as well as the ADA upgrades. And this should comprehensively take care of Siwanoy for years to come. And that really was the goal of the board, not to just do piecemeal or little parts of it, but take a holistic look at it and deal with it comprehensively, so we don't have to come back to that building for a long time. Those are just some photos of within the building. So you can see a lot of pillars, support beams, poles in the rooms that obstruct the view and movement around the room. Just an overview of what it might look like, and I've got the boards back there if you want to take a look afterwards as well. You can see here, this is the original footprint of the building, which will stay the same, and then we would add an expansion there that's in the similar size, shape, and proportion as the main core of the building. And it would be designed to look identical to the building. This is just a quick floor map. Purple means renovation, blue means new. So this whole building would get a facelift inside, all the infrastructure updated and replaced, plus the expansion. Okay. This is the current Google Earth above view. So you can see this is what it might look like now with that expansion. The main current building, and then the expansion here, and it would be designed with the same brick. We'd do everything possible to match it to the greatest degree possible, just like what was done with Prospect Hill. Another view from, this is the back on Manor Place. And again, that's what it might look like with the expansion there. So we'll be putting together stakeholder groups to meet with parents and community members to try to make sure we get those details as right as possible. And folks are very worried about where the kids going to play during construction, because we will lose parts of the playground. We do own the property across the street between Siwanoy Place and Pelhamdale, where the path is. We would likely move one of the play sets over there and have the kids have recess out in the front during construction. And maybe even see if we can shut down Siwanoy Place, similar to what they did with Highbrook during the colonial construction. Quickly moving on to Proposition 3, that has to do with this building, and that's an expansion to create an additional cafeteria for the high school students, as well as 2 floors of science labs. It would be 8 new science labs. And as we said on the tour, the expansion basically would run pretty much right across here. Our breezeway is right out here, so it would run from this building over to the middle school. It would be connect between the 2. The ground floor would be the student center that you can see on the plaque back there, a place where students can eat lunch, they can gather, congregate. It could be large, it could be a cafeteria space if needed, and large gathering room. And then above it will be 2 floors of brand new science labs. For our high school students. We're currently we don't have enough rooms, and they're outdated and need upgrading. So that's the work that would be done in those rooms. This is our current this is the room that we're sitting in right now. This is our middle school lunch. Half of our middle schoolers eat down here. The other half eat up on the top, on the far end of the building. And then there's only about 50 seats left for our high school students. So we want to provide a space for them. This is the rendering of what that expansion across here might look like. We'd do, again, work to match this high school building to the greatest degree possible. And that's the same rendering that you see in the back of what a potential student center might look like. And that's it from the sky. It basically is going to create kind of a quad situation here. So we would do some landscaping in there to make that also an extension of area for students to gather and congregate in their off periods. And finally, Proposition 4, and I should have said the high school proposal is $40.4 million. And then the final proposition, another $4.5 million, will be for geothermal heating. It's a sustainable approach to heating that long-term pays back dividends on utility costs. It'd be higher upfront costs. There are some tax incentives and potential rebates and grants. With this, we'd have to get full cost approval from the voters, install it, and then apply for those on the back end. And we're only proposing that at 2 schools because those are the 2 where it made sense. We were doing air conditioning and heating upgrades, and they had the space for it to sufficiently heat the building. So that's Prospect and Siwanoy. And that's the overview. The last item is there's 3 seats open on the Board of Ed. We have 3 incumbents running uncontested for those 3 seats. Natalie Marrero, Will Treves, and Jackie DeAngelis in ballot order, and they would be elected to the board for 3 more years. So tonight is our final official bond information session. So thank you for coming to the last one. The polls will be open on May 20th from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. There's early voting, there's absentee voting, and lots of information on our website. And I am happy to give you a couple names because that brings us to the end of our presentation for tonight. So any last questions? Yes? Yes, at the latest, yep.
So what would happen with the Siwanoy property?
So once we see what passes, we're going to work with the. Oh, the question was when would if construction starts in June of 2027, would that be the infrastructure, and then when would Siwanoy project start? We would meet with the, once we know what passes, we're going to meet with the construction team and figure out what makes the most sense as far as order of the projects. I don't think it's feasible that we would do work at all the campuses at once. I think that would be too much for us, too much for the community, because you'd have construction everywhere. Plus, we've got recreation programs, before and after school childcare programs, that we'd want to stagger the work across the building. So I think what we'd probably do is work to identify just a plan that makes sense. We can do the expansions during the school year. The renovations basically have to happen when school's not in session. So mostly summers, could be over evenings, weekends, holiday breaks. So one thought, and it's not the final thought, one thought we had was to maybe start with the high school project and then take more time to plan out the Siwanoy project, given all the sensitivities around it. So to be really more thoughtful and detailed, especially because of how close it is to the neighbors and the impact on the community. The other benefit of doing that is that if we did it in the other order, if Siwanoy went first, the students in that building would go through construction, and then they'd come up to the middle school and high school, and they'd go through construction again. And we thought that would be kind of disruptive to the education for students to have to go through most of their K-12 educational experience, 5 years of education, having to live through multiple construction projects. So we're thinking about those kinds of things. How do we coordinate them to minimize the impact on instruction, minimize the impact on the neighborhood, stagger it so it's not overwhelming to the community, and it's, we're able to manage it. So I wish I could give you a better answer now, but that's kind of how we're thinking about it. And once we get past May 20th, we'll be able to better answer that, and we'll communicate that out.
Will you have to move students out of the building?
No, we would do the work during the summers. And like I said, the expansions, we can do it during the school year, just like we did at Prospect Hill. So we'll just cordon off areas, we'll work with principals to make sure that there's safety protocols in place, but we should not have to relocate. Great. Okay. All right. Yes.
Yeah, I'm just wondering whose idea was that if proposition, I think, if I understand it correctly, if that doesn't pass, the rest won't pass
Yes.
either, right?
Yeah, that was a collective decision
But
by,
whose idea was that?
I think it was all of our ideas together.
Yeah,
It was-
hi, I'm discussed, so it's a lot for the voters to consider, right? And so the reason we did it this way we realized it. So we considered all the options, put it all together. Well, that's humongous for people to decide on. What is the most critical thing needed for our schools? We need to keep, as one of the board members says, we need to keep the heat on, we need to keep the water out, and there's one more thing she says.
Lights.
And the lights on, right? So the infrastructure, that Proposition 1, is the basics. Like if you go and take a look at, I'm not sure how close it is to where we are right now, the water that's been seeping into the building, right, just as an example, and crumbling the plaster, and then looking at the boiler rooms and seeing the water, like just how old they are, we knew that at a minimum, we had to make sure that if the voters were voting and we separated out propositions, we couldn't say, well, let's say Siwanoy passed, but we didn't get a yes vote on the infrastructure. It would leave us in a position where we were at risk of some of these infrastructure items failing. And we you know how you sometimes just have to prioritize
and
things.
you're talking that incident is in the high school,
The recent incident was in the middle school.
the middle school.
And that
And
recent,
the new building, that's the new building.
so
That's
what
it.
happened was the HVAC system, the cooling system and heating system that's on the roof,
Yeah,
what was how many years old?
It's as old as the middle school. It's
So
original to middle.
25 years
25, yep.
Right? And it goes fast, the time, like you don't even think about it.
but you know, with Lynn, we have every year so much for maintenance.
Yes.
And you know, the same with Colonial School, they used up a lot of money over the years.
Yeah.
I mean, when you go through item by item,
It's
you'll
a
be
lot.
surprised, I think.
I know.
And that's why I say, you know, with the old bond issue, there gotta be an explanation for what they were used, because history going back, and it is a fact, a bond issue was floated. Couple years later, another bond issue floated, and happened to be for the same items the previous bond issue, okay? And
Yeah.
and this was a nightmare for the Board of Education, because it was just happened that a stupid woman remembered and kept the paperwork and everything, and it
Wow.
was
Yep.
true evidence that happened.
Yeah.
And, you know, the bond issue, when they get floated, they can use it for any other repairs.
I
Yeah.
think tell me
Yeah.
if I'm wrong.
Can
with the
I just make one quick
Yes.
suggestion? Chris, I'm thinking, since we're having more informal
There is
conversation,
no
maybe we can
accountability,
end, and then we'll just stay and
with all
talk.
due respect,
Thank you.
No, I
You know,
appreciate-
nobody bothers, it's too much